Hello and welcome. Today I am reinstalling my transmission and bleeding the clutch line. I have already prepared my transmission for the most part, but I still need to grease the spines of the input shaft. So that's our first step. Now I'm going to grease the spines on the transmission. Sachs makes this special grease for the job. And this grease is extra sticky to stay on the spines and not fling off due to the centrifugal force. Now, it's very important. You'll notice this package of grease is tiny, and that's deliberate. Sachs has a special video on greasing the input spines. If you put too much grease on here, then the grease flings off of the input spines and gets on the clutch disc. And I'll probably link to that video so you can see it. It's a great demonstration. Once the grease gets onto the clutch disc, it's ruined. So you want to go really easy with this. Okay, time to put the transmission back in. That is great news. Let's roll it in here. You may notice at this point that I actually install the clutch line incorrectly. So if you watch a little bit later in the video, at some point I figured that out and flipped it around. But just note, don't install it this way. The transmission is in. I had to lay on my back and use my feet to basically kick it in because you're supposed to have it like seated on the engine block before you install the bolts. That was a little bit tricky, but it's in. So now it's time to install the transmission mounts. When you do this, be sure to use some removable Loctite. I'm going to install the bolts onto the transmission first because they don't really have any adjustment. And then I will line this part up. Alright, the brackets are attached to the transmission on both sides, 65 Newton meters of torque, and it's reasonably centered, so now I'm going to put these bolts in. When you're torquing these guys, you only torque these to 23 Newton meters. Right, so I realized I kind of rushed through that. I think I was just in a hurry to get it back together and get driving. I put the torque specs up on my blog, and the video where I removed the transmission and mounts and all of that stuff gives you a better idea of the location and procedures. So use the removal process as a guide for putting it back together, and then use the torque specs on the blog. Everything on the clutch is back together. Hooray! Transmission's in, clutch is assembled. I've gone under the transmission and closed the bleeder valve, which looks like this on the slave cylinder. So it's closed, everything's buttoned up and ready to go. It's time to bleed the clutch line. I bought this power bleeder on Amazon for pretty cheap, and it works great. It makes the job of bleeding the clutch and brake lines a lot easier. And this time around I decided to use Pentosan .4 LV, which stands for low viscosity. If you're curious about why I'm using LV .4 brake fluid, check out my video comparing the different types of brake fluids. Brake fluid is in. To use this, just dump the brake fluid in, screw the cap on, and then pump it up to maybe about 15-20 psi. Be very careful you never get any brake fluid on your paint, as it will destroy it. I'd rather stop a little bit shy of pressure than too high. If your pressure is too high, you can break this little plastic reservoir or do some other damage. With this pressurized, I'm going to jump underneath the car again and open the bleeder valve. So here's the bleeder valve. And the system's under pressure, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I've got a bucket underneath to catch the brake fluid. You can see the brake fluid slowly dribbling out there. When I first opened it up, a bunch of air came out, and I could actually hear it go shh. But now brake fluid's coming through, so that's good. And that's exactly what you want. That sound right there was air bubbles escaping the line. Now, after you've gotten several bits of air bubbles and stuff out of the line, come back here and check the pressure and pump it back up a little bit, because as the fluid bleeds through, you'll lose pressure. With that done, just repeat the process. Keep doing this until you don't get any more of those air bubbles. After you've bled the clutch line several times and you're not getting air out of it anymore, you've probably got all the air out of the line itself, but you still have a little bit of air in the master cylinder, which means you gotta climb in your car and press the clutch down. Now, the first time you do this, the clutch will probably feel really soft and wrong. Don't panic, it's just because you have air in the master cylinder. In fact, when you press the clutch down, chances are it won't spring all the way back up, and it may even stick to the floor. If it does, just reach down, pull the clutch up as much as you can, and then bleed the line some more. After you've bled it a little bit, you should get a little more air out of it. Jump inside again, press the clutch down. It should feel a little bit better at this point. Bleed it again, see if you can get a little more air out. Keep doing this until your clutch springs back like it normally does and feels right. Thanks for watching, guys. I really love all the awesome comments and feedback I've been getting from this series, which is almost over. The next video, I have a couple tips about how to reinstall some of the muffler parts and the support plate. Pretty simple stuff, and also some tips about torquing the drive axle if you had to take it out. You don't even have to take it out unless you're replacing the CV joint, so that's an optional step. And that's it. The IMS project will be over, so this is really winding down. I will definitely go into more detail about the tools I used. I did start a post on that already, and I am also planning on breaking down the cost and time required for the entire project. So stick with me.